I'm Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, and welcome to another edition of the Chicken Head Chronicles. Now, this week I want to talk about a new goodie from my friends at The Future Was 8-Bit, and that's Rod Hull and Sanction, and they also work with Tynesmouth Software for creating the hardware. Now, if you don't know who The Future Is 8-Bit is, you need to get to know them. They've got some awesome stuff. Their team designs and builds hardware for a bunch of 8-bit computers like the VIC-20, like the PET, which you see behind me here, Commodore 64, and some other 8-bit machines like the, what is it called, the ZX Rainbow or something like that, some machine I've heard of before. They make things like the Penultimate cartridge, which is incredible. You need one for your VIC-20. They make things like the SD2PET, which I'll show you a little bit more about in a minute, for using an SD card on your Commodore 64, VIC-20, Commodore 128. And they also make a cool device for the PET called the PET 2 SD, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, I recently picked up this PET here at a local resale shop. This is an model CBM 8032, which is one of their later models where they actually switched the name from PET over to CBM. You can see right on the front here that they actually switched the name in order to give it a more professional appearance. They also, with this series, with the 8000 series, went to an 80-column screen, which is kind of cool. Now, I've been looking for a PET for about 2 years now. It was one of the few things that's not in my Commodore collection. But now I have one. I got it for a good price. Works absolutely perfectly. I will be doing a full review on it in a couple of weeks. Now, the PET line always had absolutely incredible storage solutions. They had drives, usually dual drives, like you'll see right here, where you can store 170K per disk. They had some where you could store 500K per disk, and others you could store a full megabyte per disk. And this is in the early 80s, when most of the competitors were fiddling around with 90K floppies or 150K floppies. Commodore was up there doing 500K and 1 megabyte floppies, which are incredible. They also had a 5 megabyte and a 7.5 megabyte hard drive storage solution, which is really cool. Now, I'll refer you over to Robin from 8-Bit Show and Tell. He did a great review of a lot of the storage solutions for the PETs a couple of months back, so I'll put the link to his video in the description. But here's a picture of it here. Good stuff. Commodore did a good thing, and they used what's called the IEEE 488 interface on their PET computers, which was a pretty fast parallel interface. Now, they customized it a little bit. They used an edge connector instead of the standard IEEE 4888 adapter, but you could get converters for them. You could get cables that converted one format to the other. They wanted to use a similar interface on the Commodore VIC-20 and the Commodore 64 line, an actual parallel interface. But for cost reasons, they switched it over to a serial interface, and then they had a bug in the software for that serial interface, so they had to slow things down. So we went from an incredibly fast IEEE 488 interface on the PETs to the slow IEC interface that we know and love in our Commodore 64s and VIC-20s. I would have to say, comparing the speed of a Commodore 64 1541 drive and a drive on a PET, the PETs feel like 8 times faster easily. But on to the meat and potatoes of our review of the actual device. This is the SD2PET Future from The Future Was 8-Bit. And you see it has an IEEE 488 interface right here, the ribbon style connection. It has an SD card here. You could put probably a 4 gig, 8 gig, 16 gig, but you don't need it that big because there's only a couple hundred megabytes probably of PET software out there. It has a reset button on it, which resets the interface and puts it back to its default, the root directory of the SD drive. And this extra cable here is a cable that connects you to the data set port of the PET, and this is where it gets its 5-volt power from. Now, it's got plenty of space, to go into the back of the PET, which I'll show you in a minute, and then into the dataset port, but no extra space at all. This cable really needs to be a little bit longer. A lot of PETs, including my 8032, actually have 2 dataset ports on them, which is kind of cool. You can have 2 datasets. It shows up as device 1, device 2, copy things between them, use 2 at a time. But it would be great to be able to get power from that second dataset port on things like my 8032. And I'll show you here where it is and where it's located in just a second. But the cable's just not quite long enough to reach. Now, here is the IEEE 488 interface. Notice it is exactly the same size as the user interface here. It's just keyed a little bit differently, but you have to be careful because these devices are not keyed, so it's super easy to plug it into the wrong port. Now, you may not burn anything out if you plug it in the wrong port, but don't do it. It's a bad idea. This plugs into the far port here, the one closest to the power supply, and it just slots nicely in there. Notice there's no pass-through here, so we have to take that into consideration. And then the power cable has a label on it that says top. Plug that into the dataset port for power. And here you can see what I'm talking about. There's no slack here. There's an inch of slack. So if I wanted to get power from my second dataset connection, which is over here, you can see my little finger pointing to it, it just does not have the reach. So I can't have dataset 1 and my SD to PET plugged in simultaneously. And there are times where I really want to do that. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to cut this little cable and I'm going to splice a longer cable into it. On my SD to IEC that I use on my Commodore 64, also made by The Future Was 8-Bit, I had to do the same thing. I would use this as device 9 or device 10 sometimes to transfer things, and so I want it sitting on top of my 1541 or 1571 drive. But the cable that was provided for power to the data set was not long enough, so what did I do? I professionally spliced it together. There we go. There's my professional splicing job. So now I have this crazy long cable and I can plug this thing in wherever I want to, and it gives me plenty of room. I'm going to do the same thing on the SD to PET. You can see it's beautiful, it's compact, everything just sits so nicely in there and does not get in the way, and it's easy to reach around the back and pop out the SD card if you need to transfer new files to it. Let's turn the PET around and see what we can do with this. Your device is going to show up as device 8 on the PET. And it works pretty much the same as like a 1541 drive would on your Commodore 64, your device 8, device 9, that kind of thing. The PETs often had superior versions of BASIC to our Commodore 64s. A lot of the later PETs had BASIC version 4, which add a lot of really cool commands to it. Now, some of the earlier ones had BASIC 1.0, upgrade those, get rid of that. Others had BASIC 2.0, but a lot of the newer ones had BASIC 4, which adds some cool commands that I'll show you here. One of the commands is going to be catalog, which is going to show you a list of what's on the SD drive here. The cool thing is that does not delete the program that's in basic memory at the time. It keeps that program intact, kind of like how we use the +4 and the Commodore 128 with their command that allows you to view the directories without deleting the basic programs. Another cool utility, another cool program is deload, which automatically assumes you're loading from disk. On the Commodore 64, you type in load and the file name, it assumes that you're working from tape and goes to device 1. On the PETs with basic 4 and some of the newer Commodores, deload actually lets you access the disk drive directly. So if I wanted to load a program here, I could just type in deload. In this case, I'm going to load the program called Wedge, which I'll explain in a second, and it pulls it right off of the SD card, no problem at all. Now, if you only have version 1.0 or version 2.0 of BASIC on your machine, you can get an upgrade from Tynesmouth Software, and the future was 8-bit. It's called the RAM-ROM. It plugs into the CPU socket, and I think it replaces the CPU, it replaces the ROMs, it replaces the RAMs with the RAM with the latest version. Looks like a pretty cool device. Now the PET to SD acts just like a hard drive. So you're going to be able to access files on it, you're going to be able to open up folders and directories of information. But the basic disk operating system of the PETs and the later Commodores don't really very nicely support directories. So what do? On the Commodore 64s and such, we have a program called File Browser that we often use to go through and look at the different directories and such. Well, File Browser doesn't work on the PET machines. There is a competitive program called CBM Commander that's supposed to do the same thing. I've tried it out, but I didn't have very good luck with it. The guys at the future was 8-bit put the wedge program on here. Now that's the program I just loaded on here. And what that does, it's the same as you can get for the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, where it adds disk commands and makes things easier to use. Wedge program's been available from Commodore from the early 80s. It just took up a little more RAM. So since we already have wedge loaded here, let's go ahead and take a peek, pun intended, at what it can do. Now the ampersand $ will be the same as the catalog command, where it will come up and it will show you the catalog or directory of what's in the program at that particular time. Now if you want to load something up, you can just hit / and the name of the file. So in this case, there's the wedge program. We'll just load it again for laughs. Loads it right up just like that. No having to type load wedge (8), in that case (1). No needing to put all of that in there. It's just / and then the name of the program. Now, of course, these commands do still all work. So if you're used to those and you want to use them, nothing's stopping you from doing that. Now here's the powerful one here. Let's go ahead and look at our directory again. All of these here are directories. The ones that have 0 after them and have the word dir there, those are all directories. We can go into those directories by typing ampersand that's the @ cd : and then the name of the folder. So in this case, we're going to go into CBM, -CBM. And the minus sign is just because that's what they've named it. You get OK right there. Now let's look at the directory again. We've got Commodore 128, C16+4, C64, PET, Tools and Utilities, and VIC-20. More directories. We want to go into the PET folder. So @cd : PET. Now we're inside of that folder. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. The CD command also has other uses. For example, it is what you use to mount a .d64 file. The PETs can handle .d64, .80, and .81 disk formats without any issue. So for example, if we wanted to mount this VisiCalc program right here, boy, that's a long name. What we do is we do @cd : VisiCalc 170A.d64. All right. Now, when we take a look at our directory, we're in the VisiCalc folder. No problem at all. It mounts it just like it is a standard .d64 image. Pretty cool, huh? Now you can use all of these utilities and going into the directories and loading programs without using the wedge program. You'll just have to use the open 1,8, 15, comma, and then the command, parentheses, and then the CD : and the file name, : close. It's just so much faster just to use the wedge. And it uses 389 kilobytes of memory, so even on an 8 or a 16K PET, you're not really going to have a problem. Now, one interesting thing about my PET is that it is an 80 column PET, and we know that because it's got model 8032. 80 is the number of columns, 32 is the amount of memory that's standard. So if you have a 4032 PET, you've probably got basic 4, you've got a 40 column display and 32K of memory. The 80 column were really designed to be more business machines. They really tried to push that. So they took all the graphics off the keyboard. They're all still accessible. You can still use basic or machine code to grab all the PETSCII characters, but they took them all off the keyboard. And some of the software that is expressly written for 40 column displays just does not work by default on an 80 column PET. We're going to load this program called PET Demo, and you see that was 24 blocks. You see how fast that loaded in there? Now let's go ahead and run it. This is supposed to be displaying on one screen here, one 40 column display, and you see it's kind of duplicating it across 80 columns. Well, that's just icky. We just don't like that. Oh, and we can't break out of it either. But all is not lost, because there's a cool program called CBM 4032. Now, I downloaded this from Zimmers.net. This is Bo Zimmerman's website, and he's got the absolute coolest resources for everything Commodore 64, VIC-20, PET, Commodore 128, anything you're looking for, you can find it on Bo's website. I'll put a link to that in the description. But the program is called CBM 4032.prg, and watch what happens when we run that. CBM 4032.prg. We're going to install it, we're going to run it, and boom, we're now in 40 column PET mode. See how it changes everything? We're not looking at the screen at the left and the right anymore, and it stops right at 40 columns. So now it thinks it's a 40 column PET. So when we run our programs like PET Demo, and we run that, suddenly PET Demo works absolutely perfectly. We'll just let the demo run for a second so you can get an idea what it can do. Nice. Nice film effect there, that's kind of cool. And all of this is done with carefully crafted PETSCII graphics. So it looks like they're bitmap graphics, but no, that's all just really nicely coded PETSCII graphics that emulate bitmaps. This one was done in 2010. And of course, on a 40 column PET, this whole thing would be in full screen mode. It wouldn't be just in this little boxy window in the middle of this screen. All it's missing is some cool SID music here. But all is not perfect in PETland, even with this utility that converts it into 40 column mode. Let's go ahead and launch Superglooper, which is actually a really cool Pac-Man clone. So you see it comes up fine in the 40 column mode, Superglooper. But what happens is that this uses the numeric keypad to control the game, the 8, 4, 6, and 2. And those don't map properly on some of these 80 column computers. So you have to use the keys on the top of the keyboard to play it. And it's really awkward. So you can use the same keys to go up and down and left and right, but training your brain to use these different keys is kind of a pain. So while it's doable for most games, it sometimes messes things up. Let's take a look at a few more that work really well. Invaders is a really cool asteroids clone that actually does a really good job and uses the actual audio of the PET, which a lot of programs did not, because PETs didn't always have audio. This one happens to have a little piezo speaker in it. But this works just fine once you find the proper keys to work with it. which in this case is insert delete to go left, P to go right, and tab key to fire. You can see this is a really good implementation of Space Invaders on a PET using just PET ski graphics. Nice and fast, nice and responsive, and it looks fine playing it on this 40 column mode in this 80 column machine. Now, one of my favorite games on the Commodore 64 was Talonguard, and when I learned that they had that on the PET, and it was actually originally coded on the PET, I just had to have it. Thing is, I couldn't find it any place. I searched high and low, every resource I could find. Nobody had a copy of Talonguard for the PET. So I put a message out on Twitter, and then my friends Particles BBS and Dr. K Ninja 2K5 got back to me with a resource that had the .tap, the tape file of it. I was excited. So I downloaded that and spent the next couple of hours figuring out how to convert a tape file to a program file, getting it to run on my PET, and then copying it over to tape so I could actually run it from tape. But I'll do a whole episode on that. It was really kind of fun. But when I was finished and I got everything working, I'm reading through the Talonguard manual online, and it says right on the Talonguard manual, it says the PET version is on the Commodore 64 cassette at about spot 230 on the counter. I've got the Commodore 64 version on cassette. It was sitting right next to my PET because I was playing with it on my Commodore 64 a couple of days ago with my new tape drive. I had the thing right in front of me the whole time. Had no idea. Wasted hours looking for it, but it was fun. Now, one cool thing about Talonguard is when you run the cassette version, it runs this little stub program at the very beginning where it puts these characters across the screen, and it must be analyzing the number of characters it prints, because it will then switch into 40 column mode for you and run perfectly on an 80 column PET, which is really cool. I wish more games would do that. Now, if you just launch just the Talonguard program itself without this stub, it comes up corrupted. So I've switched this over into 40 column mode already, and I've got Talonguard loaded on here. Let's see, it's called Cassette Talonguard. This is 112 blocks. Imagine how long on your Commodore 64 it would take to install a 112 block program. So we're going to do castel.prg, loading it up. And it's done. That was what, 8 seconds, 10 seconds to get that loaded. On a 1541 drive, a 112K block program would be like 4 minutes, 5 minutes. This thing's fast. You can see Talonguard launches just fine. You can play it just fine. We'll start a new character, and that's fine. We'll call this guy Tenmark. And it goes right into the Talonguard program, no problems at all. Now, when you go to save it, even though I've launched it from the SD, I launched it from the PET to SD, when you go to save it, it's gonna ask to save it on tape. Now, I've already looked at the basic code on here, and yeah, theoretically, I could probably go in and reconfigure it to maybe save it onto the SD card in here. But I'm just as happy playing the game on here, launching it from the SD card, and then when I want to save the character, I've got my tape drive plugged in, save it to tape. That's why I need to get the power to that second data set port. Now let's take a quick look at some productivity software. One of the first spreadsheets ever created was VisiCalc that came out on the Apple II, and then they switched over and they put it out on just about every kind of 8-bit machine, CPM machine, DOS machine that you could think of. It's actually a really powerful spreadsheet. Now, normally VisiCalc requires a special ROM installed inside the PET in order for it to work. but there's a version out there that has that copy protection removed that I'm using for, investigatory purposes. So first of all, we're gonna mount our D64. So VisiCalc 170A.D64. Okay, we've mounted it. Let's take a look at what's inside that disk. VC starter. We're going to go ahead and load that. So we'll just deload that. Now this is going to automatically determine whether to launch the 40 column or the 80 column VisiCalc program. Takes a couple seconds to load it in, but then it's going to run it automatically. And we've got a fully functional spreadsheet right on here. Excel, eat your heart out, because we've got VisiCalc. Now I still need to figure out how to use the program, but it's actually pretty cool. Now, of course, you can always create a blank .d64 file and save any program you want to that, any file you want to that. You can save it as a PRG file into any of the folders in there. You can create new folders if you want to on your Windows machine, and they show up fine right here. Works absolutely beautifully. Load and save commands work just fine. This is set to device 8. You can change the device number of it, but remember, just like on a Commodore 64, everything pretty much assumes device 8. So you may want to keep this as device 8. And then if you've got some floppy drives, maybe daisy chain those, hook those up as device 9, and save things back and forth to those if you want to. If you've got a PET computer, you really don't have any reason not to own one of these. These are fantastic. Now, it would be cool if somebody ported over the file browser program, because it makes it kind of nice to be able to browse through and look at everything. And I can't imagine it'd be hard to do. I mean, they've got it working on the VIC-20, they've got it working on the Commodore 16, so I'm sure it's super easy to port it over to the PET. I would like to give a huge thanks to my Patreons. You guys are awesome. If you would like to join up and become part of my Patreon family, just look me up at patreon.com/10mark, and for as little as $2 a month, you can make it to this prestigious, beautiful green screen right here also. So please like and subscribe. Comment to me, tell me about your pet adventures, tell me what kind of pets you have, tell me what kind of hardware you have for your pets. I'd love to find out more about it. I'm really curious to see what other people are doing with their pets, because they're really cool machines, they're really nice. Now, rumor has it that there's been an old 8mm reel-to-reel video review found of the PET from 1981 that should be coming out in a couple of weeks. Might be kind of fun. But until next time, this is Doug from 10-Minute PET Retrocast, signing out. Oh, come on. That should have been 10-Minute CBM Petrocast. What was I thinking? Jeez.